What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. It is Professor Anime, and welcome back to yet again another Tokyo Ghoul re-episode review. So, without further ado, let's sit back and enjoy, and let's begin the rant. So, you know what, when it comes down to Tokyo Ghoul Re's anime so far, it's been adapted with not particularly things that I am quite fond of as far as how this anime has been adapted. Now, is this a bad adaptation? I don't know if we can literally say it's a bad adaptation because of the fact that at least it is adapting the manga. It is trying its best, at least in some cases. But the way on how it's going about and its pacing is what the thing about this anime that's really, you know, irksome, in my personal opinion, because the pacing is what the series has the biggest problem with, because you're skipping out on various character interactions, building up the story and world building before we get to these action bits in which what we see in this episode. The reason why I bring the pacing up again is because within this episode of Tokyo Ghoul Re, this episode adapted around 4 to 5.5 chapters of content. That is right. Around 5.5 chapters of content. And you can immediately assume, with that many chapters adapted into one single episode, that the pacing is going to be incredibly rushed. And in my personal opinion, it did. It did feel that way in this episode as well. Episode 1 of Tokyo Ghoul Re adapted 6 chapters of the manga. In this episode, around 4, 5.5. Yeah, so it's rushed. Now, don't get me wrong, despite the fact that this episode felt kind of rushed, this wasn't particularly a bad episode in what I personally got out of it, because I did have some enjoyment with this episode of Tokyo Ghoul Re. However, the way it was brought about in its pacing, and just due to the events that were happening throughout the auction raid arc, the beginning of it at least, it just felt rather forced. Now, in the beginning of this episode of Tokyo Ghoul Re, it had some decent pacing with it in terms of what was presented within the auction raid arc. It seemed like everything was going pretty well, and then as soon as Juzo came into the fray and the operation officially began for the auction raid arc, then that is when things started to crumble. It seemed like. It seemed as though the pacing just became a huge clusterfuck, because there was just so much shit going on, which, don't get me wrong, a lot of shit happens in this arc when it comes down to what was contained within the manga, but in terms of the pacing and execution of it, I did not feel as though that it was presented well. But at least when it comes down to the content that was introduced within this episode of Tokyo Ghoul Re, I can't really say there is too many problems with that, because they did do a decent job as far as what was being presented within the arc. Just on how its pacing went down is what the real problem was. Honestly, I would have personally broke this episode up into only 3 chapters, and then basically go from there within the coming episodes. Honestly, I just felt that the second half of this episode really did felt forced. But anyways, enough of the rant. That was just my personal qualms that I've had with the episode. Just the pacing alone is what really irked me in this episode, and I'm just gonna have to take it for what it is at this point. I'm just gonna have to take what the anime is at this point, because it seems as though the most that they will be adapting when it comes down to each and every episode is at maximum gonna be 6 chapters, okay? Because if we're getting episodes that have at least 4 to 5 chapters adapted, then, I mean, hey, what's stopping them from making another episode adapting 6 chapters, right? So, but anyways, regarding what happened within this episode of Tokyo Ghoul Re, is that we see that Mitsuki gets put on the spot as being technically the bait of sorts for the ghouls that are bidding off humans, in order for the ghouls to take them, eat them, do whatever they please with them. And that is where the auction is being taken place. We also have Big Mama there. We even had Scarecrow that was introduced in this episode, which he was in fact introduced in the manga chapter for Tokyo Ghoul Re, right when the auction arc took place. We do see a brief glimpse of him. As to who he is, we have no idea at this point. But as a manga reader, I will tell you right now that keep a lookout for him. keep a lookout for him, because he might appear in several other cases within the series. Now, the biggest top priority of this mission is to capture Big Madam, whether alive or dead, whatever, or I'm pretty sure, you know, to at least capture her alive, but some of the CCG members think that they're solely going into this operation in order to rescue humans, or rescue civilians who have been held captive, who are being auctioned off, and that is what one of the members of the CCG, the head honcho, basically states to them. Your top priority is to, you know, rescue civilians. But within the back of his mind, he even states that at least that's what I have to say. The top priority, yes, while saving civilians is something that we must keep in mind, the top priority of this mission is to capture Big Madam. And that is where we see Juzo come in, and we already know, if you guys remember the connection between Juzo and Big Madam in Season 1 of Tokyo Ghoul Re, as far as, you know, what was implemented within Season 1 of Tokyo Ghoul Re with the dynamic between Madam and Juzo, I can't remember if they delved into Juzo's past too well, you know, regarding the whole backstory between him, but if they did, you guys will remember Big Madam from, you know, Season 1 of Tokyo Ghoul. But if you don't, that's a huge problem that the anime left out, because, you probably are gonna have no idea who Big Madam is in the first place. We also have our Yuri Tree arrive at the scene, working with Torso as well, and we also have the Roswald family arrive at the scene as well, which Kane takes an interest in Mitsuki, as, you know, basically, we find out in this episode that Mitsuki is in fact a one-eyed ghoul, from what it looks like, but since she's working with the CCG, they didn't really elaborate on the whole, you know, ghoulification when it comes down to the CCG's new methods and whatnot, so the world building kind of falls flat on that when it comes down to this episode, so I don't know why they haven't explained this yet, but anyways, regarding what was contained within this episode, we find out that Mitsuki is a one-eyed ghoul, and that is why not only Torso is interested in Mitsuki, but also as to, well, Torso is interested in Mitsuki in, you know, mind and body, you know, so to speak. Not Shu, but Kane wants Mitsuki to give him to Shu, because if you recall, Kaneki was also a one-eyed ghoul, so Kane sees that if he is to retrieve Mitsuki and show Mitsuki to Shu, maybe it can bring back Shu as far as how he was previously, because Shu had an attachment for the one-eyed ghoul Kaneki, so maybe he can find another attachment or some other way of, you know, comforting himself if he is introduced to Mitsuki. And then, of course, we also have some various other characters being introduced in this episode of Tokyo Ghoul as well, such as Eto. I mean, she did appear in the last episode of Tokyo Ghoul Re, but she does make a reappearance within this episode as well as Dr. Kano. And what Dr. Kano states to Eto is that, I think it's about time we bring out Owl. So, yeah, we're gonna see what, you know, that is pretty soon, but the ending of this episode is probably what got me the most excited to see what's going to happen in the next episode of Tokyo Ghoul Re. Yes, this episode did make me excited, despite the fact that I had a lot of problems with it, was seeing Takizawa finally animated. And if you guys remember Takizawa, you would remember that he was a member of the CCG. So I know for a fact there's a lot of anime-onlys who are going like, what's with all these CCG members becoming ghouls now? What the hell is going on? That's what I'm saying. They don't elaborate on the world! Sorry. But anyways, yeah, seeing Takizawa was good to see in this episode, and I just can't wait to seeing everything animated with him in the next episode of Tokyo Ghoul, because it seems as it's going to be a bloodbath, you know? I mean, they did censor the individual that he killed at the ending of this episode, because in the manga, the dude literally took off this guy's head. So they're probably going to be censoring a bit more in the next episode, but we'll just have to wait and see. At least seeing Takizawa, you know, their Pineapple-kun, at least that was good to see. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, what you guys thought about this episode. It was a relatively decent episode, but it felt incredibly rushed to the point to where it kind of felt flat because they tried to cram in way too much. But let me know your thoughts.